My name's Evan from the Lonely Stoner podcast, and today I'm going to be going over some of the UFC 311 matchups and some recent UFC matchups that have just been made for the future, especially bantamweight. So I'm going to start with the Jailton Almeida versus Sergey Spivak match, going all the way up to the main event, Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan. Beginning with the Jailton Almeida versus Sergey Spivak fight, when it comes to these heavyweight matchups, you really can flip a coin on who's going to win. I would lean to Jailton Almeida because he's on steroids and he's also a ground hugger. And at heavyweight, I feel like you can get hugged on the ground, gassed out. And then second, third round, Sergey Spivak's not really going to be able to do much about it. He's one of those fighters who wins one, loses to the half-decent guys he fights and beats the sort of bums that he'll come up against. Just coming off against a win against Marcin Tybura. Before that, I lost to Cyril Gane. Before that, beat Derek Lewis and a couple other heavyweight bums. So for this particular matchup, I'm probably going to go with Jailton Almeida. Even though his last performance against Derek Lewis wasn't a great one, it was kind of a nightmare matchup for him, and it was a great finish from Curtis Blades, to be fair to him. So in this one, I'm probably going to be leaning towards Jailton Almeida. You know, he's used to be a light heavyweight. He's got a bit of skill there, a good front kick on him. He's got a good build for the heavyweight division. A lot of strength there in the wrestling particularly. I see him sort of grounding out Sergey Spivak for a few rounds, if not submitting him in the second or third round. So I'm going to move on now to the next matchup, which is Peyton Talbot versus Raoni Barcelos. I think this is probably a pretty obvious pick for most people here. Peyton Talbot, if he gets a very impressive victory here against Raoni Barcelos, he's probably looking at a ranked opponent next. Coming off I think it was like an 11-second knockout versus Yanis Gamori, if I'm not mistaken. It was a 19-second knockout against Yanis Gamori. So if he gets another impressive victory here against Raoni Barcelos, then he's probably looking at a ranked opponent. Those sort of lower, sort of 13, 14, 15 range for Peyton Talbot. He's very exciting prospect. I'm sure if you follow in the UFC closely, you'll know who he is. He's been getting some very fast finishes. So if he gets an impressive performance here, I could definitely see him fighting a Kyler Phillips, Eamon Zahabi, Montel Jackson. Maybe not Marcus McGee because he's on the come up and he's on a win streak and he's looked very impressive as well. And they won't want to snuff out Peyton Talbot's momentum that quickly because Marcus McGee is very good. I rate him and I think he will get in the top 10. I think he might have been matched up against Kyler Phillips. I'm not entirely sure, but one of those 10 to 15 range. I mean, not Jose Aldo's number 11, not Jose Aldo. I don't want to do Jose Aldo dirty like that at all. So for this one, I'd definitely be going Peyton Talbot first. I'll go first round knockout. First round knockout for Peyton Talbot against Raoni Barcelos. I just see him, it's just going to be another smoke show for Peyton Talbot. Another impressive performance I see happening. And I don't know too much about Raoni Barcelos, just peeping his records. Lost to Kyler Phillips, lost to Umar, he's lost 4 out of his last 6. So this should be a layup for the 9-0 Peyton Talbot, really. So I will move on now to the next matchup, which is Honey Walker versus Bogdan Guskov. I really don't want to pick Johnny Walker because he's become such a meme of a fighter, just getting knocked out in the goofiest way possible, every single fight it seems. And he's on a bit of a winless streak right now. I think in his last 3 or 4 fights, he hasn't got a win. Last 3 fights, no contest versus Magomed, knocked out by Magomed, and then knocked out by Volkan. So he's on a 2 goofy-ass knockout streak. This guy, I don't want to pick him, but at the same time, we haven't really seen much from Bogdan Guskov. I remember clearly his debut against Volkan, which he was submitted, but his last couple of fights, I'm not really too sure, to be honest. If I'm just peeping his record quickly. beat Zach Puega, who's a nobody, and TKO'd Ryan Spann, who isn't a nobody, but he's probably as close to a nobody as you can be without actually being a nobody. I mean, yeah, and Ryan Spann, I believe, is going up to heavyweight as well. So, yeah. This one's a 50-50 because Johnny Walker is not bad. He gets wins. And I could definitely see him beating Bogdan Guskov. But you know what? No, fuck it. Fuck it. Fuck it, we'll do it live. I'm going for Johnny Walker win here. I'm going to go for a finish for Johnny Walker. I'm going to go a first or second round knockout. I think he'll get hurt. I mean, in most of his fights, I think he gets hurt. He gets wobbled. I'm going to go for Johnny Walker in this one. I want to see him do well. And for the people saying Johnny Walker needs to go up to heavyweight, you're bugging. You're bugging. He's just going to get slept by everyone at heavyweight. I don't want to see Johnny Walker go up to heavyweight. It's not going to be good for his career. And yeah, just stay at light heavyweight and get the sort of wins that you can get. Anyway, moving on to the next one. The next one, Kevin Holland versus Renato Moicano. So this is a middleweight matchup. Kevin Holland, at this point, he's a big-time UFC veteran. I think he's had over 25 fights in the UFC. You know he's that typical 50-50 fighter. And I think his last fight, was against Roman Dolidze, where he got docked. He got corner stopped. Kevin Holland's kind of been going out sad recently. I mean, he had this fight against Michael Page where he was completely outclassed. He had this fight against Michael Oleksiejczuk where he had a lot of trouble in that fight, but he ended up getting the victory by submission. But his last fight obviously was against Roman Dolidze. Renato Moicano didn't look so impressive in his UFC debut, which was not, it didn't even feel like it was that long. Yeah, Gerald Meerschaert, that was on the Prates Magny card, the Apex card. Right, I do remember this one. Yeah, again, Gerald Meerschaert gave him a lot of trouble. But at the same time, to submit a guy like Gerald Meerschaert, who has the most submissions in UFC history, you kind of have to respect the game. I mean, I think he was a double champ in ONE FC. So he's definitely going to be able to cause Kevin Holland some problems on the feet and on the ground. Again, Kevin Holland's another guy I like a lot. I want to see him do well. But again, I don't see him getting it done against sort of this level of competition. I want to pick Kevin Holland, but at the same time, I don't feel like he's going to do it for me. So I'm going to go with Renato Moicano decision victory. And now we're moving on to the serious matchups. Beneil Dariush versus Renato Money Moicano. You know, if you've been following the channel, you've been watching the podcast, you know that we love Money Moicano over here. He cannot afford to lose. I'm picking Renato Moicano in this matchup, but let me go into it a bit more. Beneil Dariush is one of the most vanilla fighters in the lightweight division. He's not really got any fast twitch muscle fiber. He's got the skills, but not the physicality that a lot of other fighters have. However, he does only fight the best fighters at lightweight. He's been, it feels like a top 10 ranked lightweight for years at this point. And because he's been at that level for quite a while, it feels like he's much older than he actually is. He's only 35 years old. So for me, Beneil Dariush definitely has a big chance to win this fight. We know that he has some underrated striking, I would say. Underrated technical, fundamental striking, but his grappling is really where most of his bread and butter is. And you got to look at if you look at his last couple fights that he lost, his last two fights, Charles Oliveira and Arman Sarukian, former champion and the guy who's fighting Islam on this very card. Before that, he was on a huge winning streak. Thiago Moises, Drew Dober, Frank Camacho, Drakkar Klose, Scott Holtzman, Diego Carlos Ferreira, who's one of the better fighters in lightweight who's not ranked, Tony Ferguson, and Matush Gamrot. This is, again, it's sort of like Kevin Holland and Johnny Walker, where I want them to win. I want Renato to win. But it's a close one. This is definitely the best fighter he's probably fought at lightweight. I mean, I do like Fiziev a lot as well, but Fiziev never fights, so this is probably his hardest matchup yet at lightweight. And I really feel like Renato's momentum from his last fight is going to carry him well into this fight. I think he's definitely got the grappling skills to match up with Beneil, and I think he's probably got the same sort of power level on the feet. Maybe Beneil's a slightly better striker, but Renato's been making massive leaps in his game from fight to fight. I mean, I feel like you can visually see it. From fight to fight, he's getting so much better. In this one, yeah, I'm going to pick Renato Moicano. I don't think he'll finish Beneil Dariush. I'd be surprised if he did. If he did, I think it would be by submission. But I'm going to go Renato Moicano decision. I feel like he's going to have multiple submission attempts there. I think he's going to have the speed advantage. I think he's going to be dinging up Beneil a bit on the feet. Maybe stunning him here and there, landing nice looking shots. I think he's going to sort of coast his way to a nice decision victory, keeping his momentum, and then calling out, a top 5, maybe a top 5 lightweight if he's lucky. But we know that those top 5 lightweights don't give up their rankings easily. If I'm just peeping the rankings quickly, yeah, just having a quick look at the rankings, he's currently number 10, Beneil's number 9. So it's a 9 versus 10 matchup. Maybe top 5 is, if he has a really good performance, then he could be looking at a top 5 performance. But if you're looking at those top 5, you're looking at Arman, who's fighting Islam, Charles, who I don't see Charles wanting to take a fight against Renato personally. Justin Gaethje would probably take that fight. Justin Gaethje probably would take that fight, but I don't think that's the fight that the UFC matchmakers are going to want to put together. They're going to want to put Justin Gaethje with the guys who are going to have banging fights, not a lot of grappling. That's what they like to do with Justin Gaethje. And then you've got Dustin Poirier, who potentially already had his last fight. But again, I feel like that would be a great matchup to put against Renato. I feel like they'd have a good fight. And it would be a great opportunity for Renato to jump the rankings a lot. But then you're going to Max Holloway. They're not going to give Renato the Holloway fight if he beats Beneil. And then you're going to outside the top 5, Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker would be a fight I definitely want to see Renato against. That would be a great one. So if he doesn't take a lot of damage against Beneil, because I don't think Dan Hooker's matched up, I think that would be a great matchup to put together. And then below that, you have Michael Chandler, who's been rumoured to fight Paddy Pimblett. I wanted to see him fight Renato before this fight was booked, but things happen. They don't want to ruin 2 fighters' momentum. I get it. And then you go to Mateusz Gamrot, who I don't believe is matched up either, so you could definitely do that. But then again, that's just one more ranking jump for Renato, and the sort of momentum he has, you have to jump him up a bit further, I think. So yeah, I'm going to go with Renato decision victory. I think he's going to get it done. I don't think he's going to dominate Beneil. If he does, I'd be surprised, and that would make me jump on his hype train even more. But I'm going to go with a decision victory for Renato Moicano. And moving on to the next one, Jiří Procházka versus Jamal Hill. Now, I've already spoken about this a bit on the podcast, if you've seen. But Jiří's only lost to Alex Pereira in the UFC. So this begs the question, is he that good that only Pereira can beat him? Or is it just the case of he was champion after 3 fights, I think, gave up his belt, came back, and he's fought Pereira twice and lost. And even in the Rakic fight, didn't look great, but won it. Then you have a guy like him versus Jamal Hill, who's, I was about to say a bit more fundamental, much more fundamental. Jiří has very little technicals and fundamentals to his game, as we were talking about on the podcast, because the boy Seth doesn't like Dricus at all. And I'm trying to tell him Dricus is the man. Fundamentals aren't that important in MMA, but he's a big boxing head, so you have to forgive him. But back to the matchup, Jiří Procházka versus Jamal Hill. This comes down to a lot for me. This comes down to, number 1, is Jiří Procházka's chin compromised after the Jamal Hill fight? After the Alex Pereira fight, I beg your pardon. It definitely could be, because he took a beating in that second Pereira fight. He got stunned badly multiple times. The ground and pound after the head kick in the second round was bad. And it didn't even feel like that was that long ago that fight was, if I'm just looking at the dates. That was in June, so this fight's going to be in January. So about 6 months. It's a decent layoff. But I feel like we'll have to see whether his chin is compromised in this one. because Jamal Hill, we know that he has some power there, and he probably has more fundamentals to land cleaner strikes against Yuri. This is a very close one for me because I could see Jamal putting hands on him for a couple of rounds and then Yuri deciding that it's time to win and then winning, because that's what Yuri sort of seems to do, is get battered and then decide to win and then just end up winning the fight. So coming to my pick, this is a very close one because I can see either of them winning this. As I said, it comes down to whether Yuri is the same guy as he was before that Pereira fight. I'm going to go for Yuri Prochazka, second round knockout. I think Jamal will land some strikes, will put him on his back, will make him back up. But I think that Yuri has more power. I think he has slightly more speed. And when it comes to the grappling, I don't see this fight going to the ground at all. So I'm going to pick Yuri Prochazka by a second round. I'm not going to say knockout. I'm going to say second round TKO. He'll catch him with something, maybe a knee or an elbow in close, hurt Jamal, ground and pound. And then that will be the end of the fight, in my opinion. Moving on to the next one is the co-main event. Merab Dvalishvili versus Umar Nurmagomedov. Another tight one because we've got two grapple-heavy fighters. But in the case of Umar, his grappling is more of a weapon to help with his striking. Whereas Merab, his striking is not a factor in his game at all, essentially. His game plan is to shoot as many takedowns as he possibly can, snuff out his opponent's game plan completely so that they can't do anything and they're helpless. If you've seen any of Merab's fights on his massive win streak that he's currently on, then his game plan is to essentially outwork you, outgrapple you, shoot loads of takedowns, make sure that you can't get off any damage against him, as we saw in the O'Malley fight. And his game plan is just going to be to do that. But against Umar, it's tricky because Umar is obviously, I think he's Khabib's cousin or something like that. And he's grown up in that Dagestani camp his entire life. So I don't feel as if he's going to be able to just do that to Umar Nurmagomedov. And I feel like Umar Nurmagomedov's striking is quite a lot better than Merab's because, again, as I said, Umar's grappling is there and it's used to build up his striking, whereas Merab doesn't really use his striking and just goes for the grappling. If Merab is able to do that to Umar, then nobody is beating Merab. Nobody's taking his championship. He's going to retire with that belt. But I believe that Umar's grappling base is not going to allow Merab to hold him up against the fence as he's done with previous opponents, shoot loads of takedowns. Umar's got an amazing gas tank as well, as we saw against Corey Sandhagen. Yeah, I think Umar's just more well-rounded. I think he's going to land more on the feet, and the grappling should cancel itself out. But if Merab is able to do to Umar what he does to everybody else, then yeah, bantamweight is a wrapped-up division. But that's a fairly simple one in my opinion. I think Umar's going to get this one done. I think this fight will end up staying on the feet more than we'd expect. Merab definitely will try to hold Umar up against the cage, but the grappling level of Umar, I don't see him being able to do it. So I'm going to go with this one, Umar Nurmagomedov decision. This one's definitely not getting finished. Umar Nurmagomedov decision, new champion. And then after that, the number one contender, I don't know, you could put O'Malley back in there, you could put Peter Yan in there. There's so many names at bantamweight, and a couple new matchups have been made. So yeah, I'm going to go with Umar Nurmagomedov decision victory. Now moving on to the main event, Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan 2. I watched the first fight back, a lot more competitive than some people would admit. And it was, I believe, a 27-year-old Islam versus a 22-year-old Arman Tsarukyan. Arman is probably by far and away the second best grappler in this division. Some might even argue he's a better grappler than Islam. And also his striking has been making big improvements fight to fight. Now his last fight was against Charles Oliveira, and that wasn't a great victory in my opinion. Islam dominated Charles, and I know MMA math does not work, but Islam dominated Charles and finished him, submitted him, and then Arman got a split decision victory over Charles Oliveira, and that was a close fight in the grappling sense, because Charles was going for some submissions. He looked like he had Arman in some trouble on the ground. And as I said, Islam sort of just dealt with Charles in a fairly straightforward manner, as he does with most of his opponents. But going back to the first fight, yeah, it was a close one. I think their styles show that this second fight is probably going to be relatively close again. If Islam is able to finish Arman with a fair amount of ease, then Islam should be the pound for pound number one for sure, if he isn't already. So for this one, it's not a straightforward prediction because the first fight was so competitive, and their styles do make a competitive fight, with both having elite grappling and also both having quite underrated striking, especially Islam Makhachev. I think he's one of the better strikers in the lightweight division. And again, it comes down to the thing where his grappling supports his striking. So his striking is able to be so much better because his grappling is so good and because the threat is there. But with Arman, the threat of the grappling isn't going to be as great as it is to other fighters. But I feel like it's impossible to pick against Islam with the names he's been knocking off. So in this one, I'm going to go with Islam Makhachev. I'm thinking either decision or third, fourth round TKO for Islam. I'm leaning decision because I'd rate Arman. I think he's going to be at the top of lightweight for quite a while. And I think this fight could end with some controversy in terms of the scorecards, because I believe if it goes to a decision and it's a close fight, they will definitely lean towards Islam. So, yeah, I'm going to go for Islam Makhachev decision in this one. And then after that, who knows what's next for him, because there is no real clear number one contender at lightweight. I mean, he could fight Charles again. I personally don't really want to see that one. He could fight Topuria if Topuria moves up, or he himself could move up and fight the winner of Bilal Shavkat. But me personally, I think there's a lot of contenders at 170. I don't want to see Islam go up and fight for 170. If Topuria moves up and Islam beats him, that's another great name added to his win catalogue. So, yeah. Islam Makhachev, decision, that's what I want to go with. And now I'm just going to talk shortly about a couple bantamweight matchups that have been made. Henry Cejudo versus Song Yadong. I don't like Henry Cejudo. His fighting style is very 2018. I feel like it doesn't work anymore. And his last fight against Merab, his gas tank was not looking that good. However, Song Yadong is more of a striker, more of a boxer. I like Song Yadong a lot. I'm not going to be making predictions for these fights, but I'm just touching on them. The predictions will come. When we're a bit closer to those events. But yeah, I like this matchup. I like that Henry Cejudo is still fighting people. I mean, I don't know about Henry in ranks, but he's still fighting people. You know, he's letting fighters potentially make a better name off of him. I'd love Song Yadong to win this one, but Henry Cejudo's grappling might be a bit too strong if that's what he decides to go to, because we know Henry Cejudo does like to favour his striking, maybe when he shouldn't. But yeah, another bantamweight matchup is Dominic Cruz versus Rob Font. I love Dominic Cruz. You're not beating Rob Font. The amount of time you have off, the infrequency of your fights, and I actually rate Rob Font as well. I feel like he's too fundamental, and people have figured out Dominic Cruz. So I would end up most likely picking Rob Font in that one. But Dominic Cruz, I mean, these type of guys should just be looking for legends fights at this point, I would say. Like against the Jose Aldos and these big name fighters that you can help sell a couple more pay-per-views with. I mean, that's the type of fights they should be doing, because fighting guys like Song Yadong and Rob Font, you know, what does that really do for you? That's not a payday. If you beat those guys, you still have to get one or two more wins to get towards a title shot, because your names aren't as valuable as they once were to be selling any sort of shows. But at least Dominic Cruz is fighting, you know. Bro's been a commentator for how long now? So at least he's actually doing something, I suppose. But I think that's going to be it from me. I've been Evan from the Lonely Stoners podcast. This has been a UFC 311 prediction video and a short news video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sweet.